Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this incredible panel discussion with what I am calling the new untouchables and has been growing and a lot of feedback coming from a lot of you folks out there. So thank you, as well as trying to penetrate every social media apparatus as well as, directly to people in the media. So if you happen to be in that category, we would appreciate you reaching out to us or sharing as well. And I'm always available for any questions that you may have. But immediately, I want to jump into this week's dialogue with the crew, and I'm so happy to see you all. To my immediate left, of course, is William K. Black. And William K. Black, for those of you who don't know, is an American lawyer, academic author, a former bank regulator. His expertise is white-collar crime and public finance, regulation, other topics in law and economics. He's been a professor in law and economics and criminology for many, many years with the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and University of Minnesota. One of the most prolific time periods of his career, he was involved as the litigation director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and the deputy director of the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, and a senior VP and general counsel for the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and probably most well known for his involvement with the savings and loan debacle. Immediately under him is his wife, and also an esteemed legal scholar and professor at the Rabina Chair in Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. She is an expert in family law, assisted reproduction, property and law, medicine and bioethics, and has also taught contracts, remedies, financial institutions, civil procedures, and feminist jurisprudence. And then immediately below, or to her right, I should say, and below me, is Marc Dann, former Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. He's currently in private practice, but one of the premier legal experts in all things fraud as it relates to supporting those who have been on the wrong end of it, and continues to do so to this day, but with incredible insight, particularly as it relates to the state of Ohio and also particularly in seniors and in many different cases that just continue to astound me. But guys, as we roll into this week has again been a very disconcerting revelation of a lot of things, from taking people off the streets without their constitutional rights and deporting them, to gutting the EPA, to continued attacks on the federal government through DOGE. Of course, the market is tanking right now. And then I think most interestingly, I hope that we can cover some of this in our dialogue, but the continuation of this mammoth revelations of Trump's pre-proclaimed, and he's following through with what he threatened, was a presidency of, I can't remember how he put it, but he's attacking all of the large white shoe law firms that were on the other side of all things Donald Trump indictments and so forth during the last administration and previous to that. And there's been a lot of discussion about capitulation and what it means and what some of these large law firms are doing. But on that note, I wanted to just open up the dialogue with you, June. Yesterday, we picked up with some very interesting things, but I think that, it goes without saying that one of the biggest issues that we're facing at the moment is all things as it relates to the Social Security panic, I would say. And I think we could start there. June, kind of walk us through what's going on.
Okay, well, I want to talk about government-run insurance programs. So, and I want to start with a story. So I have a colleague who teaches insurance, more free market in his orientation than me. And I was looking at publicly run title insurance in Iowa. And I said to him, the government really does a better job of running insurance than private companies. And he guffawed. And at the end of our discussion, what we ended up focusing on there are two different kinds of issues when you talk about insurance and pensions and fraud. One is the insurance company ripping you off? The government, publicly run insurance programs, publicly run pension programs, which is what Social Security is, are dramatically less likely to rip the individual off than private companies. But what about fraud against the government? Well, there's almost no fraud with Social Security coming from individuals. There's under 1%. The massive fraud the government deals with is in Medicare, Medicare especially, and Medicaid secondarily. And the crooks who have been arrested say, yeah, it's easy to rip off the government because they don't have enough agents to keep up with the fraud. If you look at these agencies, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're dramatically understaffed compared to private insurance companies. Now, let's talk about what Elon Musk is doing when he says we want to run the government like an insurance company. Well, first, he's lying. The first thing they did was fire the inspector general, including the inspector general at HHS, the person who oversees the efforts to go after fraud. And in Medicare and Medicaid, very little of it is by individuals. It's by these fake hospital associations that set up shop and submit all these fake bills. That's where the fraud comes from. Repeat players, big entities who are defrauding the government by submitting fraudulent claims, not little individuals, okay? But let's talk about something else. Okay, so the government has to fight that fraud. It has fewer agents prepared to do so than a private company, which tends to fight that fraud more vigorously. And Elon Musk is making it worse. But that's not what he's focused on. He's focused on cutting benefits. And if you listen to him, he was apparently on Fox News this morning talking about some crisis in government spending. And everybody knows you can't deal with government spending without looking at programs like Social Security. How does a private company deal with that? Well, when you have the Secretary of Commerce saying, hey, you know what happens when you stop delivering payments? It's the fraudsters who squeal loudest. My mother or my grandmother wouldn't be out there complaining. Well, what he's talking about is Medicare fraud. Yeah, if the government made a glitch and didn't pay people, those fraudulent entities out there that would be screaming. But those are big crooks. They're not little people. They're the entities set up to exploit weaknesses in government investigations. When he's describing this, what he's talking about is what a private company does. What healthcare company is number one in the country in denying claims? United Healthcare. Why was the CEO of United Healthcare assassinated? I don't know. We don't have a full explanation, and I don't know that United Healthcare is doing anything fraudulent. But we know from a Google search, they're number one in the country in denying claims. How does an unscrupulous company cut claims? By simply denying them 30% off the bat. Now, if people want to fight them, they have an appeals process. And if you pursue the appeals process and you appeal a couple levels up and you fight, eventually you get paid for something that should have been paid in the first place. But if all you do is deny a whole lot of claims, the most vulnerable people, the least sophisticated people, the grandma in the early stages of Alzheimer's, the person who broke a leg or is a veteran with PTSD who can't get down to the local office, they don't get their money. That's what they're talking about. What insurance companies do that are unscrupulous. And again, I emphasize, I don't know which ones are legitimate, which ones aren't. But I know because I used to teach these cases. There are a whole lot of cases of unscrupulous insurance companies that simply deny all kinds of claims. And then if you appeal and protest, they eventually will pay you. But in the meantime, they have your money, money to which you're entitled, money to which you're not being paid. The big assumption is that's what Elon Musk is doing. Make it harder for people to get their money. Don't, have the checks not go out one month. Be slower, just slow down. the amounts of payments, deny some claims that are perfectly valid, and then close all the offices and phone services that allow you to deal with that. I want to tell you how good Social Security is. When Bill had trouble applying, a Social Security worker called him on a Saturday morning and spent an hour on the phone with him to make sure he got his benefits. The federal government does not cheat people by denying claims that are otherwise meritorious. Um, but the people who hate government, and Elon Musk hates government, is trying to make it act like a private company that saves costs by not paying people to which they're entitled, and that tries to do what has been the Republican playbook for decades, make a government agency that works less effective. And then you get people angry and they will call to privatize. They've done that across the board. They're doing it to the post office. They're doing it to public schools. They're now trying to do it to Social Security. Now, I have more to say about Social Security and how it's funded, but I just want to emphasize that the playbook Musk seems to be employing is the playbook of private companies that commit fraud on customers as a business model. What he is not doing is what private companies do, which is hire a lot of agents to prevent fraud against the government. He's not doing that. He's cutting those folks. But he is, and seems to be doing in lots of arenas, what the most unscrupulous companies do, which is deny claims to people who are entitled to them and then just slow down the process by which they can recover that to which they are owed, because that saves a whole lot of money unscrupulously, unfairly, and in an arena where fraud is almost non-existent.
Wow, boy, did you combine a lot of stuff that a lot of folks have been thinking about, starting with uh, Luigi Mangione, for example, in that example. But
And I'm not justifying him,
no, of
nor
course
am
not.
I
Of
saying that United Healthcare did something that justifies the murder of its CEO. I am not saying that.
course not.
I am saying when you look at what the public complaints are, it is the kind of tactics that Musk seems to be championing.
Well, and also Howard Lutnick's claim as the Commerce Secretary and a billionaire hedge funder in his own right
Yeah.
is quite fresh, obviously, in context what you laid out. But I find myself compelled to move that to you, Mark, because boy, you've been in that arena for a long time by way of the state public pensions and so forth. What are your thoughts based on what you just heard from June?
Well, I think and maybe it's because she and Bill are in Minnesota, but I think they let United Healthcare and their buddies off a little. She let it off a little easy in her analysis. I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal this morning, but they had a front page story about the fraud among Medicaid providers, the insurance companies that are ultimately the Medicaid providers committing by collecting for people in two different states at the same time.
Mm,
They don't, and there is fraud going on. It's being committed by the largest health insurance companies in the country,
right.
Mhm.
not by poor people who need health insurance. They're actually getting their health insurance and don't even know that Big Daddy United Healthcare is collecting for them across the border in Wisconsin if you're in Minnesota. So I think that's uh, and June is exactly right. The other thing that I fully expect them to undermine, which is a huge tool in uncovering Medicare fraud, is the KETAM process at the federal level. The Justice Department has immense power to determine whether or not to bring whistleblower or to allow whistleblowers to bring claims against those that defraud the federal government. I think the vast majority of those that have been brought in recent years relate to healthcare or Medicare or Medicaid fraud. Um, and so what you've heard nothing of from DOGE or from the White House or from the Justice Department is how they're going to beef up those efforts to help whistleblowers who come to the federal government with clear evidence of fraud being committed by those healthcare providers that June's talking about. If they really want to get at Medicare fraud and Medicaid fraud, that's the way to do it. The Social Security fraud idea is simply a red herring. For every person that Elon Musk can present to me that failed to get to have a disability claim, I think they're more focused maybe on the disability side than the retirement side, but who got a disability claim approved even though they weren't disabled. I can show him 10 people who are genuinely disabled who have, even with the help of lawyers navigating through the system, have had to wait 6, 7, 8, 9 years to get their disability benefits that they paid for in their payroll deductions, or for my employees that I've paid for to a large extent. In my payroll taxes as well. I think June is spot on here. But it's only it's just like everything else that they've done with this DOGE, this made up agency that doesn't exist, that is out pretending to fight fraud. None of it has any relationship to the reality of the operation of those agencies. And then leading now into the continuing announcements from RFK Jr. about randomly laying off 20,000 people at HHS. They're closing Social Security offices. And it's a terrible thing. Bill's experience is the same experience that a number of people have related to me here about having that Social Security office in your community. And they want to cut off phone service to people. Now, I represent. I've been representing a lot of people who have been ripped off by online predators, and I'm particularly focused on going after the crypto ATM machines that these fraudsters are using to collect the money that they're extorting from innocent senior citizens. And so we've had an influx of older clients in our office on that. By the way, I have no idea whether these cases are going to succeed or not, but I placed a huge bet that the aiding and abetting criminal fraudsters ought to be punished, and you ought to at least disgorge the money that you recovered by abating and abetting that fraud. But that's for a different show. But my point is that I can't even get my clients to sign electronic retainer agreements on their phones, which is about the easiest thing one can do. Some of them don't even have smartphones. I have a client who's disabled and older, and he has to get to my office to sign any document. He has to use the paratransit provided by the county and make arrangements 4 or 5 days in advance in order to be able to do it and be picked up. So the idea that you take the phone away from the people that might have any kind of problem getting their Social Security benefits, changes in accounts, fraud on their accounts, needing to change the designated ACH destination for their funds. It's absurd. And then they're closing, I think 50 or so offices. I know in Ohio they're closing one in Mansfield, which would make the closest Social Security office at least 90 minutes away from anybody in Mansfield, Ohio. That's Sherrod Brown's hometown, by the way, for reference. And they're closing one in Columbus, of course in a neighborhood that has the lowest, the worst demographics. And there's this perceived effort to unload all this government real estate. So yeah, I don't know if I couldn't say it better than June, except that I would hold those insurance companies that play a huge role now in the administration of Medicare and Medicaid. I would hold them much more. That's where the fraud is happening, and those guys they've paid their tribute, and so they're not going to be. You're not going to see DOGE or HHS or the Justice Department focusing their attention on them because they have made their deal with the devil. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, but two more law firms, one more, Skadden Arps, very large, very prestigious, $1,000 an hour lawyer law firm, promised to do $100 million of free work for Trump, in exchange for them not being exiled, from contact with federal government. Right out in the open, right in front of everybody. Two brave law firms sued, Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block. So let's give them some credit today, for standing up. But I think if you dig deep enough, you'll see that the reason that's why they want to get rid of all these folks watching. That's why you'll see no key tam enforcement for the next 4 years, is because those guys have paid their protection money.
Wow, it just gets crazier and crazier at every turn. And Bill, going to you, I mean, one of the things that was one of the most profound moments of seemingly an endless array of them in making the kind, primarily based on your tutelage and direction and work during the savings and loan crisis that set the tone for all of this stuff. But when I was interviewing Paul Pelletier, who was the former director of investigations of white collar fraud at the Department of Justice, and my sort of approach for questioning was to try to configure between the FBI and the DOJ where the criminal referrals were as it related to the great financial crisis. And what we had learned was, in addition to what we found out that didn't happen at the FBI, the same thing happened at the DOJ because they were overwhelmed, in his words, with control fraud. But it wasn't the GFC control fraud, it was Medicare control fraud. So in the context of this, to hear a guy like Lutnick, I mean, I can't help but think this was all, again, step and repeat planned of the guys on the inside of the machine that you came up with in all of your efforts decades ago. I mean, how do you respond to the kind of the direction of this dialogue at the moment?
So let me follow Mark's course of they're not even friendly amendments, they're friendly additions and such. So what I know Skadden Arps from most famously was running an extortion racket. You better hire us, put us on retainer, or we'll be part of the takeover or anti-takeover, whatever it takes to go after you. And so Skadden Arps got very rich from a product of extortion, which is why I think they recognized what Trump was doing immediately and rushed to buy him off, right? We are seeing extortion / bribery just transparent. I mean, the barest of a fig leaf. I sue you, you cave to a ridiculous action, or I, threaten you, and you have the best ability. I mean, think of Skadden Arps' ability to fight this compared to any of the rest of us, the public. It would be legendary. And they not only caved, they caved, like 2.5 times a Paul Weiss cave. Type of thing. It's, what all the totalitarian experts warned us in advance about this rush to comply, to give in before you're actually forced to give in. So at the merest threat, we see huge corporations simply giving in. Now, our wonderful Commerce Secretary, as you said, a billionaire, he was talking about his mother-in-law. And he claimed that the only people that complain were, if they didn't get their check, were fraudsters, which is, first, I can tell you as a white-collar criminologist, a complete lie. The people that complain are the ones who are living. It's over 40% of people receiving Social Security that it is essentially their only source of income. So when the check doesn't arrive, they potentially starve to death. That's why they complain. But what's different if you're got a son-in-law who's a billionaire? Doesn't matter whether the check comes or not. He's not going to let his mother-in-law starve. His wife isn't going to allow that. It's the stupidest lie. And again, everything you hear is a lie. So let's talk a subtle but huge thing. The E in DOGE, right? That's supposedly efficiency. Now that's a lie as well, but that would never be the E you would start with if you were trying to make things better. It would be the Department of Government Effectiveness, right? That is the key mission. And then you do what you can do on efficiency. And why are you going to have problems with efficiency throughout the government? Well, David Kay is one of the world experts on this. But my mentor, Henry Pontel, world famous white collar criminologist, he actually invented the concept, the term, in its systems capacity. And what it really is, systems incapacity, right? So the congressional Republicans, for at least 35 years, have been running an unholy war against the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodities Future Trading Commission, the key regulators of finance at the federal level. And what they deliberately do is deny them sufficient resources to have mission effectiveness. Now, both of those entities, just like the IRS folks that David Kay is such an expert in, these are huge money makers. So, and where's the cheating? The cheating is on the billionaires, right? That's who's getting away with it. That's who gets away with it in the SEC context. That's who gets away with it in the Commodities Future Trading Commission context. So the CFTC does those fancy financial derivatives that blew up the world in the great financial crisis. For example, in the modern era, something like 90% of all trade messages, I'm using a weird word deliberately, for securities are in hypervelocity trading, right? And that has been true for roughly 20 years. The dominance has grown enormously over those 20 years, but it's been the dominant form for something like 20 years. To this day, the SEC does not have the sufficient computer capacity to monitor hypervelocity trading. Even retrospective investigations, they don't have the internal capacity with regard to hypervelocity trading. Why not? Because Congress, more precisely the Republicans in Congress, have every single year made sure that they slashed any budgetary provisions that will allow the SEC and the CFTC to be more effective in protecting you. Now, there are all kinds of problems within those agencies. And again, if you were worried about effectiveness, you mentioned criminal referrals. The banking agencies secretly killed criminal referrals. We don't even know what date because we could never get Congress to investigate this question. In the federal banking regulatory agencies, somewhere roughly 2002-ish. And we can only infer it because the examination instructions changed, where it used to say make a criminal referral, that was deleted. And when we called up, when I got reporters to call up after the great financial crisis and talk to the criminal referral coordinators, the press would call and say, and they'd be told, we don't have any such thing. What are you talking about?
Right.
So they not only removed the process, they removed all the people. And again, conservative economists, what is their best estimate of the lost GDP because of lost productivity? 41.7 trillion. A trillion is $1,000 billion. So This has nothing to do with efficiency. These are all designed to destroy government efficiency, to destroy government effectiveness, to allow corruption by the billionaires, and then say, oh, no, billionaires don't commit fraud. Only those little people that when they don't get their Social Security check. Oh, no, that's where all the fraud is. Don't look at us, type of thing. So that's what we're all seeing. And the media, even pretty good stuff, on, the likes of YouTube, they still act like this is a real thing, that, Musk isn't good at it, but he's really trying to audit agencies. He's not auditing anything. There are procedures of how you run an audit. There are procedures of how you try to judge effectiveness, right? And you don't hire 22-year-olds who've never run anything to know anything about that. It's not a coding issue, right? It's a McKinsey type thing, if you like McKinsey type stuff. But, they again are
They were too busy with
fanatically
opioids
anti-regulatory
to
people. I'm
to
not
take this.
suggesting you bring those clowns in. They would destroy things, but at least they would be asking questions, nominally, that went to, what are you trying to accomplish? That'd be a good place to start. That's how you judge effectiveness. And what you would see all through the civilian governmental agencies is that we don't spend nearly enough, and that if we spent more net, because of they would crack down on the billionaire cheaters, we would actually bring in far more money net. We're going to net become massively less efficient, massively less effective as a result of Musk's actions. And again, we call it Musk, but it's really some combination of whoever runs the country between Musk and Trump. And that may vary from day to day, and maybe even hour to hour, for all we know.
By the way, that's what I refer to it as, the Elon Trump presidency. To put this into perspective to the viewers out there, Bill and his team had initiated 30,000 criminal referrals in the savings and loan crisis, which led to 1,700 convictions of the highest level white collar executives with the best criminal defense attorneys in the world for a con that was, I believe, 180 billion. I can't remember the total scope of it, but it certainly wasn't 42 trillion in terms of the hit to the GDP. But that's the whole point, Bill, is the discovery, those that are actually, skilled, but with the leadership. We talk about how the fish rots from the head, right? And the CEOs through a control fraud, but the same goes from character to implore everybody with a strategy to be able to do what was an impossibility during your time. And it was extraordinary. But looking through the rear view now, Bill, I mean, I know you can imagine a lot, and I'd like you to dovetail this into what maybe June might be able to pick up on immediately thereafter. But it just seems to me that what we're looking through is the carnage of 40 years of control fraud that just was found out through the Heritage Foundation, through the nature of the technocrats with Project 2025 that wanted to create this unitary presidency for the exact reason that you revealed to the world in your consequential work. How can we be looking at the exact same thing and they got away with it?
Well, again, we mentioned last time or an earlier time, the Powell memorandum.
True.
This goes way back in terms of the decades, and we know what prompted it. And what prompted it was the actions of pro-consumer folks and people like Marc Dann in positions of the state AGs who started to use the law effectively. So I'm sure Marc has done this same process, and he was actually a leader, right? I was a leader at the staff level. And so I don't want to try to take credit away from my bosses, whose strategic vision was doing this. But what we did that worked in the savings and loan debacle, and given the name, you can see it's kind of interesting to talk about something working in a debacle, but it would have been a savings and loan catastrophe, but for folks like Ed Gray saying, completely contrary to his laissez-faire philosophy, completely contrary to his close personal friendship to President Reagan. He said, no, this is a disaster. We're creating, he didn't use these words, but a criminogenic environment, which is completely out of control. We need to turn the ship around and go the other way. We need to adopt regulations. We need to double the number of examiners, not slash them. We need to double the number of supervisors. And basically, every examiner you hired was like saving $1 billion net for the government, because that's what elite fraudsters cause catastrophic losses. And then eventually, if they grow, they cause systemic losses because they cause major banks to fail in massive runs. And it's those kinds of things that start getting into the trillions of dollars of losses. By the way, the same economists that did the 41.7 trillion, again, very conservative economists, said they didn't think there was any long-term GDP loss due to the savings and loan debacle. But there would have been, I mean, the curve of the growth of the fraudulent firms was becoming nearly vertical when we acted, right? So we focused on effectiveness. And then we talked about efficiency and the other, this deliberate creation of systems incapacity. We were not allowed, but due to a stupid OPM historic thing, that the different things adopted at different times, we were only allowed to pay our examiners 3/4 of what they could get at any of the other federal banking regulatory agencies. Now, think of that dynamic. Your best people will constantly be leaving in those systems. So we had to do a weird workaround that where we could get competitive even at the federal level, much less with private sector folks. The Elon Musks of the world would simply fire all the examiners, and you would have had that $41.7 trillion catastrophe in the savings and loan debacle if you had had an Elon Musk and a president like, as you say, Elon Trump.
Right. And that goes to the recurring theme of what everybody has been talking about, but June brought up last week about honor and the nature of the integrity of the system, and getting back to that. And June, what I heard from your previous sort of analysis with the Social Security, it just seems to me that I think that you were inferring, and this is what I was interpreting based on everything that we've learned from control fraud along, this long journey of ours. But DOGE is, I think, committing fraud on behalf of the government.
Yes. Well, as I said, insurance companies that want to make money, that's what they do. They screw customers. They fight fraud that rips them off. They commit their own frauds. And that's what Musk is, in effect, arguing for. But I want to shift grounds a little and talk about the big lie George W. Bush, and the entire Republican establishment have been talking about for a long time. And that's this idea of the government running out of money. So part of what he has been saying about Social Security is there's this crisis coming, this massive amount of debt, and Social Security is a Ponzi scheme that is driving the debt. So I want to explain a little bit about how Social Security works and what he's talking about and why it's part of what's really the big lie. So first, how do private pensions or insurance of any kind work? You bring in money in time one, and you pay it out in time two. And what you do with the money you bring in time one is you invest it, and it grows. that opportunity for investment and growth is an opportunity for fraud. If it is a government entity investing the money and they take risks, the money might not be there. But when you look at pension funds, you also find people who target pension funds. There was a scandal during the Great Financial Crisis in which a trader, Fabulous Fab Ture, was caught, sending emails to his girlfriend saying, about unloading toxic waste on random people he ran into in the airport. The people he was really unloading toxic waste onto, that is, underwater securities he knew would inevitably be worth a whole lot less than he was selling them for, were teachers' pension funds. I mean, it was German banks and teachers' pension funds were the, the folks you could cheat in that era. But it illustrates how pensions run. You invest the money between time one and time two. If you invest wisely, it will be there in time two. If you invest badly, it won't be there. And there are people who are seeking to rip you off in the meantime, if you're not a sophisticated actor. But that's not how Social Security works. Social Security, and the fact Social Security doesn't work that way is part of why it is incredibly well run and not fraudulent. You bring in money in time one, you pay it out in time one. Okay, so you bring in Social Security taxes, and you use the taxes that are paid today to pay out the benefits for Social Security today. Now, the problem is if you think it's a traditional pension fund, which it's not. If you think it's a traditional pension fund, then you say we have fewer young people and we have more old people than we used to. And therefore, Social Security taxes can't fully fund the system. There's a crisis coming. This is a Ponzi scheme. Okay, that's what Musk is saying. The fact that the money we take in today may not be able to pay all the people for whom we promised money makes it a Ponzi scheme. And I say, no, it's a tax scheme. It is a government system of guaranteeing old age relief. Yes, it corresponds to how much people worked, but it's not a system where you put in a pot of money, you get the pot of money you put in. It's an insurance system where we all pay into a system that then provides for older people. If you live longer, you get more money. If you live less, you get less money. But it's not the money you put in. It's the money the system generates. Now, if we have a problem because we're not allowing all these immigrants in, so we don't have enough young people, and we have too many old people, there's a very simple solution for that. Change the tax base. Elon Musk pays no more in Social Security taxes than I do. It's capped at a certain dollar amount. You hit that dollar amount, you stop paying taxes into the system. There's no reason that I should pay something like the same amount of money into Social Security as Elon Musk. And I pick me because I'm tapped out, okay? I make money that is more than the point at which my money stops being taxed. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. If you have a system that is designed through a tax to pay for the benefits incurred, hey, I'm getting a lot of Social Security payments right now. When I turned 70, I applied. I got the money, okay? No reason I can't pay more money into the Social Security fund. Simple solution. Why is Musk, or we could just tax billionaires a whole lot of money. Why does Musk not think in terms of those solutions? Because he doesn't want to pay taxes. You know, this is an ideological crusade to eliminate the federal government and to justify massive tax increases. When you hear, he's not even talking about that. Social Security, let me be clear, is not a Ponzi scheme. It is a tax scheme. A tax scheme that guarantees there will be enough money there for people who have worked, who have earned credit to be in the system, and who are now retired. It would be a worse system for a lot of reasons that are fairly complex. If I put in money today, and the money I put in today is what generates the money for my entire retirement tomorrow. That would be a worse system, not a better system. It would be a less secure system. It would be more open to fraud by people Elon Musk is probably friends with. And certainly people who are paying Trump a whole lot of money in the way of campaign contributions. It would be a more fraudulent system. So when you hear him call it a Ponzi scheme, what he's saying is, I don't want to pay more taxes.
That's amazing, Mark. In terms of, again, it seems like all things come back to Ohio. When we were making, the con, I'll never forget the excruciating stories of those pensioners that worked for Mountain States in this huge pension fund that got decimated by the 2008 great financial crisis, leading to this Butch-Lewis Act that Bernie Sanders had brought to the fore. And it took years and years and years, and through the I can't remember the spending bill during Biden, where there was some backfill. But to June's point, particularly as it relates to the fab, right? We also have information, for example, from Mark Zuckerman, the Wall Street journalist who wrote The Greatest Trade, based on the John Paulson, not to be confused with Hank Paulson, variety of what became The Big Short. But in that context, we learned that not only were they, if anybody's ever seen The Big Short, you saw that Christian Bale's character had done his research apparently and was shorting and was waiting for the floor to drop because they knew that everything was cataswampus based on the numbers and how things were supposed to work. That's a shortcut. In the case of John Paulson, it turns out, and we got this from this crack prestigious journalist, he said that they were actually digging in to find the worst of the worst liar's loans to plug into these securities that they were then unloading on the teachers and a lot of other unions, by the way, that we've discovered, and this was all planned for season 2 of The Con, but the Supreme Court about 3 years ago heard this case from the Arkansas Teachers Pension Union and the pipe fitters and there was another union that was in this class action where the Supreme Court decided that this was all an act of God, that all the stuff that we know from Fabulous Touré and everything that was in all of this stuff that we know that was the fraud that blew up the world, that, through these money managers, targeted teachers, they targeted union people. And these are the people you have been defending in the states. And there's another piece of this, isn't there, in terms of, isn't the states themselves protecting the fraud? Mark, isn't that been part and parcel to what you and
yeah. Well, so in Ohio, we have the third largest set of public pensions in the country after New York and California. The teachers, so all of the statewide, all of the teachers and public employees pensions statewide are aggregated. Cincinnati is a grandfathered independent plan, but every other public employee in the state is in either one of 5 statewide pension plans. And they have it's been looted by Wall Street folks with a different scheme now. Now we're looking at the private equity folks who have come in, who do not provide any transparency to the work they do. They collect fees on money that has not yet been deployed. So they collect fees on if the investment is 25 billion or 25 million over 5 years. They start to get their 2% on the 25 million before it's even invested with them in the deals, and then there's nobody's looking under the hood to see and of course there's no public disclosure like there is in the public securities market. So the staff is just turning their head the other way because these are all politically connected folks that are coming in because of their political connection. I mean, I started my my statewide career in Ohio when the State Workers Comp Fund, which was also a multi-billion-dollar fund, got caught investing in a rare coin fund that was run by the county party chairman of Lucas County, Ohio. So taking injured workers and small businesses' money that's set aside to pay for injured workers and investing it in rare coins. And then the other investment that we uncovered was a single investor hedge fund, being the Workers' Comp Fund being the only investor, that was indeed a Ponzi scheme, except that there were no investors that followed, so we just lost it all. The State Teachers Retirement Fund lost $500 million in a private equity fund called the Panda Fund, that bet the electric infrastructure in Texas would never fail, and they lost 100% of their investments, and there was no oversight. So and these are, whether it's contributions to the Republican or Democratic governors associations, whether it's contributions to the to directly to the state parties or to the candidates themselves, or probably, in again, much more surreptitious, but Trump again. We can't go a week about marveling at the fact that Trump has brought all this out in the open. That it is what they've been doing at the state level, what they've been doing at the federal level for years, and been ashamed of and embarrassed of. He's now doing very openly and directly. And it's honestly, they just passed a bill that requires civics classes to be taught in every public university in Ohio. The governor signed it this afternoon. I actually think that they should include in the curriculum watching The Sopranos, because that is the best description of the Trump presidency that I could possibly think of. They are, and the issue with going after the firm that extorted businesses over takeovers is, Trump's taking back that territory from them. He's taking they moved in on his. He's moving back. He's taking back their the vig on their business. But that's watch the con for sure, but watch The Sopranos. That's how this is being done, and that's what's happening. You can draw in June, and Bill and Paul have been so great at helping me understand the connections here. But you can just draw a big red line. I wish we had that board you created in the con where we could have a wall and start putting the connections between the payoff money and the delivery. Today, two good examples out of the CFPB. I know it's a little off the topic, but so the Senate passed a bill refuting or gutting a regulation that limited overcharges or bounce check charges to $5 for banks. 52 Republican senators voted in favor of that. Josh Hawley, to his credit, voted against ending that regulation. Now, whether they can get that past the House or not with a 2-vote margin, I don't know. But I'm actually, after this, I'm going to sit down with a new congressional candidate. By the way, a fabulous congressional candidate that's come out of the woods to run against a Republican in not a marginal district, but kind of in the second tier, where so some of this is happening on the ground. We're seeing it happen. I'm going to say it. You just get up every morning and talk about how this guy, every time you have to pay a bounce check fee, blame Max Miller, the Republican congressman that's going to vote to end that. The other thing they did is they just announced that essentially by executive order of vote, the acting CFPB director, that they're just not going to enforce the payday lending laws. 8 years the CFPB fought in court to get those regulations cleared to start, and they announced today in a direct payment to the payday lending industry, which is one of Trump's earliest supporters. Big multiple members of Mar-a-Lago are payday lending owners and oligarchs. They're just not going to enforce it. So we're back left to the states.
Mark, are they not going to enforce the federal law protecting armed services?
Right. Yes, they're not. That's
the federal law protecting our troops.
Yeah. Right. So as a recovering politician, I'm telling you, they're creating some beautiful issues. If the Democrats could be possibly smart enough to focus on those issues, I mean, as fun and interesting as this Signal chat group text about killing Houthis is and certainly it's an outrage, and any senator, congressman in any generation of my lifetime would be as outraged as they should be. But that's not what people give a shit about. I mean, they care about getting their checks bounced, and people wake up and realize that when they've renewed their payday loan for the third time and realize that they're never going to get out of paying it because the interest rate is 300%. Those folks are they can be mobilized.
It's
Somebody talks to
500%
them.
in Missouri. 500%.
Yeah, right. Well, we got to. Right. We passed a bill in Ohio. We have the best payday lending law in the country, only because I may have mentioned this in a previous session, is that because the Speaker of the House got caught in London eating and drinking and carousing with the payday lending lobbyists, and so back then when there was a little bit of shame, they quickly came back. They deposed the Speaker. And rushed through the payday lending bill that had been pending for, I don't know, 20 years, and did it in a way that was not attackable in court, and it's still holding. But there around the country there are 500, 300% loans. There's tribal loans. There's internet loans that are originated, and it really is a national problem requiring a national solution, and that's what the CFPB did, and they just got up today and said, and there's a press release. I mean, I actually have a Google alert for the CFPB, and they issued a press release today saying we're going to make it easier to borrow money we're going to not regulate payday lenders anymore. They transparently announced it, and so 2026 is getting closer every day, and so because I know I'm never hopeful on these conversations, but they're just, some of this stuff is just so outrageous. And again, if the Democrats can and the Wall Street guys like Schumer can get out of the way, and let the Democrats talk about this stuff and only this stuff in the election coming up, there could be a real shift. Now, will that be the entire solution? No, because we're going to have to look. Forget about the white shoe law firms. I was on a call with former AGs yesterday. It was really disturbing. Most of my former colleagues left the AG's office and they went to work for basically tall building law firms lobbying AGs around the country. The one thing when you become an attorney general is that someday you'll be a former attorney general. And so I was like everybody else when a former attorney general from any state knocked on my door. I was always happy to talk to them because that there for the grace of God could have gone me. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that to make a living after I left office, and so I've been lucky that way. But they are because the idea came up of filing an amicus brief in these law from former AGs, which I think would be a very persuasive bunch of people of both parties. By the way, we were very bipartisan. NAG historically, and what's called the Society of Attorneys General Emeritus, SAGE, is very bipartisan. But Democrats and Republicans alike their law firms have put down the hammer and said, don't get in the middle of this. So it's going to come down to I guess the street lawyers like me to do this stuff and to bring these challenges and to represent people. And I think there's a basis to challenge the CFPB's inaction here, because you've got a validly enacted regulation that require, and there's a way to repeal it, but that's not what they did. They just said, "Nah, we're just not going to do that anymore."
But there's also a federal statute protecting troops and their spouses.
Right, and yes. Oh yeah, that's right. And they just I mean, they could do it with personnel, which is how they did it last time, by just not hiring people or letting people by attrition. Now by firing people at these agencies. So, same as with all the other agencies that they're doing, but I mean, and that's almost quaint now in retrospect. Now they're just saying, well, we may have a CFPB and we're going to have employees there, but they're not allowed to do this anymore. So we're done with that for now.
Well, we are coming to a close. As you were talking about that, I was reminded, I can't believe the 20-year through line of these predatory, lenders, these that you were just describing. I was also reminded of Jack Abramoff, if you guys remember all of his insider dealings and how that played out. And it just seems like, we're going from bad to worse, which I think, I mean, the payday lenders is what I was referring to. I can't believe how prominent that's going to obviously be, all things considered. But, if I could just ask you guys moving forward, I mean, obviously, Bill brought up some incredible solutions and some ideas with state AGs and bringing cases and so forth. But the audience is obviously, and the American people writ large are in a crisis situation, but it seems like everybody's gotten hit, right? It's before the 2008 great financial crisis, you would have people who got caught in the subprime disaster, right? And that's kind of a specific sort of audience, a little siloed, right? Even though there was 30 million plus people, that were involved. But same with Black Lives Matter, same with, Me Too, same with these other things. And one of the discussions that we had recently with June and her colleagues was the importance of coming together, because it seems now there might be an opportunity because everyone is under the thumb of this downward spiral, which I'm just going to call it what it is. And I can say this, June, without hesitation, because I saw Jennifer Taub say it recently on her podcast, the F word. It's fascism. Whether it's corporate fascism or government fascism, it's fascism, what we're seeing. So the legal scholars, the guys that have been in the trenches, that have been fighting the corruption forever, there's only one pathway forward. It's with the experts that know how to beat this stuff. And so for closing thoughts for this week moving forward, Bill, maybe picking up on what you left off last week, problem solution.
Okay, so to pick up Mark's point, but to put a sharper point on it, we should be so lucky it was the Sopranos, right? This is the President of the United States with a Supreme Court saying that he could literally assassinate any of us with complete impunity. All right? That is vastly scarier predator, and that's why they're so open. They're so open for two reasons. One, to terrorize, right? Second, to advertise. This is how you bribe us, right? Yeah. So you're right. As white-collar criminologists, we usually deal with these sophisticated techniques. We call it camouflage type methods. You try to appear to be, a seemingly legitimate firm. Trump's way past that point. And you've given it a name, Mark, the Josh Hawley standard. It's too much even for Josh Hawley. That's how over the top these people are in this terrible combination of greed and hate and just, we can do anything. And so, yes, that is absolutely why it's fascist. So what's a good news? It comes back to Mark's point and why Trump is intimidating the law firms. The Achilles heel, even with the Supreme Court, is the district courts and the courts of appeals. And the Supreme Court won't allow everything, right?
John Roberts is trying to be a patriot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in another 6 months, they may go all in the way the law firms caved, for all we know. Yeah. But June and I were both trial attorneys for the federal programs branch, June for much longer than me. That group was created for the specific purpose of defending federal acts, laws, statutes, but just executive actions. That is a small group, and my guess is 80% of them refuse to lie. so I haven't even heard the phrase federal programs branch in any of these cases. They should have been defending all of these deportation cases and such, but that I don't think those attorneys would have lied. And that means we need thousands of lawsuits. Thousands, not dozen, not a few test cases. We
Right.
need to make systems incapacity work the other way around.
We have to flood the zone.
We have to flood the zone.
Okay, Mark, you got to jump.
Run to daylight, baby. Run to
Yeah,
daylight.
exactly. Right, exactly.
Mark, we'll look forward to connecting with you again next week. And June, I want to give it to you for final comments. Thank you. Mark, do you have anything else to add?
No, I appreciate it. My dogs have to go outside, and I before I go, and if I don't, my wife will be very unhappy. Thank you so much. It was great
Thank
to
you
see
for
everybody
joining. We
again.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
And closing comments, June. I've been inspired by your, again, Bill and June. What June has been doing miraculously, but then again, it's just why it's so important for people to understand what we're collectively bringing to the table here. But June has been out in front of what every mainstream prognosticator and anchor and everybody is talking about 48 hours after she introduces it on these discussions, but with so much less information, so much less clarity, so much less problem solution. And, June, again, we were talking about Social Security this afternoon and the fraud, and I still can't get over this lie, deny, switch the blame, implicate formula for everyone involved with the Trump presidency, right? So just closing thoughts into next week, because it seems like if we're going to turn the tables, we need direction, as we've been hearing throughout. But
all right. Well, first, good news. I'm sitting here watching my news feed, and what flashes today? Judge halts Trump administration's CFPB downsizing efforts. A Washington, D.C. federal judge blocked the Trump administration from stopping work and pursuing mass firings at the CFPB. So we do have some progress. I do talk about the big picture, and I think the point we've been making, let's look at how visible this is. The Trump administration doesn't pretend. And what the through line is for the stories we've all been telling and you, Patrick, put together in the con is that starting with the Powell memo in the 70s, and supercharged by the Roberts Court, including John Roberts personally. The goal of the court has been to free the Übermensch, the Nietzschean Übermensch who inspired much of Nazi thought in the 30s. The idea that the great man, and Elon Musk definitely thinks of himself as a great man, should be freed from the shackles of government regulation, from the Lilliputians who might try to hold a former president accountable for a violent insurrection, who might try to, in the recent pardon of today, let a guy who was convicted of securities fraud, gave him a complete pardon because we assumed there were enough campaign contributions in the background. This is the head of Nikola, the Nikola company.
The truck? The truck that wasn't?
Yes, he's gotten a get out of jail free card for securities fraud. And one of the lessons from the savings and loan crisis, from the financial crisis, from the Me Too movement, is that once you see the frauds, so Bill can tell you there were some early cases in the early days of the savings and loan crisis that resulted in juries acquitting. I can tell you my own case I was involved in, where no Arkansas jury would convict somebody, a former politician, of lying in a federal loan application. But once you have a scandal, once people see they get hurt, once they understand what Harvey Weinstein's MO was when it came to women, juries convict. And the fact that Trump does things so blatantly, the juries he has been appeared before get it. This is not mystery. You get a willingness to hold people accountable once they understand what the fraud is. And I have only a final note that I think we should pick up at some point in the future. One other thing you should realize about this predatory behavior, about the financial crisis and subprime loans, about predatory lending, is they look for politically powerless marks. So the homeowners who were the biggest losers in the financial crisis were Black people, Black homeowners who had college degrees, not who were cashing in on something, but who were the victims of targeted subprime lending, who qualified for prime loans, that is, with better interest fees. And they were ripped off because they were politically powerless. And the Trump MAGA machine looks for people they can villainize that allows the crooks to get away with impunity. And so doing what you're doing, making fraud, corruption, the focal point, and how this is ripping off little people, and how the claims of downsizing government are really getting rid of government enforcement officials who prevent the little guy from being ripped off. That's the message we need to have out there. And I think that message is beginning to resonate.
Well, and that's a magnificent way to end this. And I do want to just save this for later, and I think I'll forward this to you. We did a podcast, and I had a whistleblower from Wells Fargo detail the predation scheme that came directly from the CEO through all of unlike what we discovered through most cases, that the brokers were independent, and that was a part of there was a reason why they were independent. In this particular case, as it turns out, they were actually employees of Wells Fargo. So the control fraud was directly in the predation scheme that this whistleblower maps out, which, again, I've been trying to convey to the viewers that, in my parlance, because I'm a next generation guy, it's like the Beastie Boys once told us, listen, all y'all, it's a sabotage. And further, it's just a child's fable. And we've seen this meme all over social media of Donald Trump as the emperor's new clothes. It always has been that. It's just understanding what the law is through discovery, the actual methodology, and then getting the evidence to be able to turn the tables. But like June and Bill have been doing for decades, they've proved it to us over and over and over. And here they are again in 2025. If they would have been listened to in a massive way in 1991, and we turned the tables and reinventing government wasn't able to sideline all the right people, we wouldn't have been in this disaster. And they're giving us their expertise, their time, their consultation in service of the democracy we all cherish and love, and we can't live without. So I'll thank you again for all that you do, and I'll look forward to our next one. And until then, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you guys so much for your time.
You too.